With a budget in excess of 1.2 billion cedis from the Stabilization Fund, I believe we could have handled this mitigation effort much better than we did. Examples from some of our fellow African countries, including Togo, our neighbor, Cote d'Ivoire, our neighbor, and Rwanda, demonstrate how an extended period of lockdown can be supported by a well-coordinated, enhanced, and effective social mitigation program. My office has been flooded with correspondence from many working-class people, especially in the private sector, who have not received their February and March salaries and are having a difficult time feeding and taking care of their families. The lockdown may have been lifted, but many businesses are still down and suffering. Employees are suffering too, just as the many players in the informal sector are also suffering. It makes me wonder why our Social Security and National Insurance Trust has not been responsive in this time of need of many of its contributors. Social Security contributions are essentially an insurance scheme made not just for pensions in old age before we die. They are also meant to help contributors in times of adversity such as this. Remember that not all will come out and queue for food. Not all will come out of their homes to receive the food boxes that we go around and hand over. But as has been done in other countries like St. Lucia, I think a token payment of all contributors of a certain token sum over 3 months would have afforded many the assurance of feeding their families during these abnormal times. While we wait for a clearing understanding of the factors underpinning the decision of the President to relax efforts to manage the spread of the virus, I urge all Ghanaians to continue to be responsible and not to assume that the country is out of the woods yet because of the removal of the lockdown. I want to strongly encourage all my fellow citizens, particularly the aged and those with underlying medical conditions, to continue to remain at home. The young are also advised to exercise precaution because in the reality of the COVID-19 Russian roulette, and for those who don't know Russian roulette, Google it, nobody knows who will live and who will die. If you please have nothing essential or urgent to do outside, please continue to stay at home. Avoid shaking hands or joining large gatherings. Let us regularly wash our hands with soap and under running water, or resort to the use of alcohol-based hand sanitizers where possible. Continue practicing social distancing or stay at least 1 meter away from anybody you are with or talking to when you step out of your house. And please wear a mask to protect yourself and others from infection. On this note, I commend and congratulate all who are working and producing masks locally, including the Medical Women Association of Ghana, Dr. Jifa Kuwonu and her colleagues, who are also producing masks to support the fight against COVID-19, and the many others who are doing so. I still urge those who can afford to show compassion and share whatever you have with the less fortunate, especially the vulnerable, including people with disability, to continue to do so. Let us all join hands in demanding accountability and transparency from the government in the management of the COVID-19 funds. After all, these are public funds contributed by taxpayers. And I'm passionately appealing to government to ensure a timely release of these funds to the institutions, health and non-health, so that they can discharge their duties appropriately and according to plan. I wish to also repeat my call for government to ensure a reduction in the cost of internet because students and pupils need internet to study from home. They've been home for over a month, and some students are really struggling to cope with the cost implications of the online lectures they are taking. In similar vein, let me also encourage the need to allow for flexibility at workplaces in order that people can continue to work from home where and when necessary. Issues have been raised about the discrepancies in data on COVID-19 put out by the government. Some of these discussions have been led by the renowned Ghanaian pathologist and former director of the Ghana Health Services, Professor Ajiman Bedu Akosa. I urge government to adopt the attitude of assurance and reassurance while explaining the sources and nature of the data discrepancies in the data, because we need to build trust, transparency, and confidence in the process and the fight against the virus. It does not help our collective fight against COVID-19 when some overzealous appointees resort to insulting persons who question the information being put out by government. While thinking and working locally, we must also keep an eye on treatments and/or vaccine development. This will ensure affordability and availability of drugs and vaccines when they become available. I called a few weeks ago for a virtual ECOWAS summit in order that our leaders can coordinate the response to the pandemic in respect of border restrictions and sub-region-wide COVID-19 response measures. I'm happy and heartened to hear that such a meeting has taken place or is planned in order to better coordinate our fight against the virus. This is necessary in order to avoid unilateralism in what is a collective struggle. We did this during the Ebola outbreak, and it served the sub-region well. For instance, it is reported that Ghana's unilateral decision to lift the lockdown has put extreme pressure on our neighbors to do likewise, even though we are all not sure whether Ghana's decision is the best course of action to take at this time. We're dealing with a new disease and are not yet sure how it will behave going forward. Meanwhile, let me once again underscore the need for testing of Ghanaians for COVID-19. Now that we have lifted the lockdown, government must truly expand our testing capacity by fast-tracking regional testing centers to remove the long delays before results reach hospitals and patients. Such delays do not only cause anxiety among the patients and health workers, but also lead to inadvertent spread of the infection. In conclusion, I'd like to reiterate that as a nation, for us to succeed, we need to see from the government that leads us a demonstration of trust and respect for all, no matter which people are involved or where they're coming from. We must be open to constructive criticism and be receptive to the pragmatic suggestions from experts, because these are critical ingredients that will engender trust and a collective will to support the battle we're engaged in with this pandemic. It is not too late for us to unite, truly unite, and to be transparent and accountable to the people. My fellow citizens, countrymen and women, we're not in normal times. We must all put our shoulders to the wheel with patriotic zeal, devoid of partisanship and parochial interest, and help with all our hearts and might to to fight COVID-19 aggressively and decisively. And I believe together we will win. Thank you. And I'll now proceed to read out some questions that you've posted to my Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter handles. I thank you for your attention. And so we go to the questions. Mahama asks, you lost as president. Why are you trying to run a parallel government? You set up your own COVID-19 team and you went distributing food. Just leave His Excellency Nana Addo alone to govern. I'm a citizen of Ghana, and the president urged us to be citizens, not spectators. And I'm also the leader of the largest opposition party. And it is in the interest of the country that the voice of the 4 million or more people who voted for me is heard. And I believe that by offering other suggestions, it would help the government to protect all of us. And so I'm just being a citizen and not a spectator. Thank you. Your Excellency, John Dramani Mahama, please come to the aid of private school teachers. We're really suffering. I am Florence Amatefio from Okaikwe. Florence, thank you very much for your question. And I empathize with what you're going through. And I believe that that is why the role of the Social Security and National Insurance Trust can come in. Because for those of you in the formal sector, SNIT contributions are paid for you. And so if a token amount of your contribution is paid over the next 3 months, it should be able to fend you through these abnormal times. And so I'll urge that government sits with the Social Security and National Insurance Trust and see how it can give a little check to people during this time so that they can survive the troubling times we are in. Here's a suggestion from Jeffrey Abvinu. The government must institute unemployment benefit tax so people who lose their jobs can draw 70% of their salary from the fund. Yes, this exists in many areas. Many workplaces have provident funds and others, and I think that this is where all those provident funds and the Social Security must come in. At times when there's a disaster or there's a massive disruption to people's lives, I think that it is a time when provident funds and Social Security funds should make a little contribution to tide their contributors over the adverse period. And so it's a suggestion that I agree with, and I have made it in the statements that I just read. Elliot Elewodrom, I hope I pronounced your name correctly. Please, sir, we know you care about the health of Ghanaians, but listening to ordinary people, Ghanaians are happy that they are out of the 3 weeks lockdown, because lockdown without food items to households was like a hell to most Ghanaians. I agree with you. Lockdown without a properly planned human intervention becomes a major problem. And so I can understand that most people opted to come out onto the streets and face the virus rather than stay home and starve. And so I believe that the interventions that were made should have been better planned so that households could receive, food alleviation while they stayed indoors. Unfortunately, that was not the case. And so people, jubilated. Some people jubilated when the president lifted the lockdown. There are examples that we see of many of our people, many of our neighbors who are doing this very well. And as a result of that, food is delivered to households and they're able to survive the lockdown. Just a minute. Give it to me. From Armstrong. Why did you take the fight against COVID-19 so seriously when your opponent did not make any efforts during the Ebola outbreak? They were rather making serious allegations against you. The COVID-19